joined by my colleague Dave Tancoo, the Member of Parliament for Oropouche West, and we will go through some of the key issues facing the country at this moment. I will go straight into my discussions here this morning, which will be focused on our energy sector. Trinidad and Tobago, as we exist today, and we will continue to exist in the foreseeable future, is heavily dependent on a vibrant, productive energy sector. What we have right now is the exact opposite of that. We have seen via the mismanagement of this current PNM administration that started in 2015 and continues today, we have seen the overall crash of our energy sector. And we would be given several excuses. We would be told about COVID-19, we would be told about matters external to Trinidad and Tobago, and that is the reason we're facing the kinds of problems that we're seeing. But that simply isn't the truth. Any clear assessment of our energy sector, it will show us that it is the policy directive of this present administration. It is by their actions that we are facing the kinds of issues that we are facing. In 2018, when we were told that Petrotrin would be shut down after a series of flip-flopping from mothballing to what have you, we are now here in 2021 facing another government policy decision, which is the liberalization of the fuel market, and we're seeing the same kind of lack of planning and lack of foresight. We are seeing that the people of Trinidad and Tobago will in fact pay a very high price for failed PNM policy. And so I want to go into that a little deeper. We had in the Parliament on Friday a debate on the finance bill. A key feature of the finance bill was the liberalization of our fuel market. We had a Minister of Finance and a Minister of Energy do their utmost best to tell us all will be well. Have no fear, do not panic, all will be well. And it would all be well and good if we could trust them. But they also told us that the refinery would not be shut down. And we have now seen a space where you guys okay? We have now seen a space where, thank you. We are in a space right now in Trinidad and Tobago where we are faced with an administration that we simply cannot trust. So bringing this legislation on Friday and pacifying an already strained population by telling us that what we have is this piece of legislation that would allow the government to do something at some point in time in the future when it will not be as onerous on the population as it is now. But can we trust them to do that? Can we trust the government to act in the best interest of the pockets of the people of Trinidad and Tobago? And all we need to do is examine their past actions. I mean, we are still dealing with a Minister of Finance when on the issue of gas prices, his most famous quote is that they haven't rioted yet. Right? And so that's the type of person that we're dealing with, who's bringing this type of work to us right now. So on the issue of the liberalization of the fuel market, we were told that the people of Trinidad and Tobago will benefit from competition. More competition could lead to lower prices at the pump. So have no fear, we're going to do okay. You will get lower fuel prices. They went on to explain this. But is that the truth? Are we actually going to benefit from competition? Are we facing a truly liberal fuel market? Because as it stands right now, Paria Trading Company remains a monopoly in terms of being the wholesale provider. If you are going to benefit from competition, there needs to be competition. Not just competition on the retail end, but competition in terms of how you get gas into our market in the first place. And so you go through the system, and the comfort to the people of Trinidad and Tobago is that the Minister of Energy will set a ceiling. And so every month, we all hustle to the papers, we look at the Gazette, and we say, all right, this would be the highest possible price we could pay for fuel this month. And that is our comfort. But when the issue of the fuel subsidy first came into being in Trinidad and Tobago, it was twofold. One, to create stability for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and two, to ensure that there was a direct to the people that we can share in the wealth of our natural resources. So it's not that it's going to pass through the middleman of the government and then maybe you'll see a benefit or maybe you won't, because you got the benefit directly at the pump. So now we're saying we're taking that away, we're going to benefit from competition. And in Parliament on Friday, I raised, and I will raise here again, there are areas, there are spaces in this country where that competition, quite frankly, just does not exist. In my own constituency, and even in the constituencies where a lot of these resources are produced, like the constituency of Mayaro. My colleague raised it in Parliament, but I think I have to raise it here again. When these areas, high production areas, my area of Tabaquite, with one gas station servicing a number of people, but in particular, a number of farmers, right, who are very dependent on fuel for their machinery, can look forward to paying always on the highest end of this fuel market, because they will not benefit from the competition that the government is presenting before us. Because as the government, as a key policy maker, would have discussed, all right, we're going to do this, we're going to liberalize the fuel market, but did not speak in any way about incentivizing persons to go into gas retailing business. So where would the competition come from? Magic? Is the Minister of Finance again proclaiming to be a wizard, and just by his sheer will, the competition will appear? There are a number of key questions that will face the population as we go forward. Again now, the ministers the government and their PR people will come out and say, listen, this is not something that will happen now. It's not going to happen today. We are just putting things in place. But it is going to hang over our head. And at any moment, by government order, when they decide, it will drop. And so we have to be prepared as a vigilant citizenry, as a population who takes very clear stake in what it means for us, how our taxpaying dollars are being spent, how our revenues are being used for the benefit of the people, that we say, listen, if you are going to enact a new policy, come with all of the details up front, because this constant way of making it up as you go along will not suffice. We have some questions as to what this fuel liberalization would mean for NP. Will National Petroleum be an active player in this new industry as the government envisions it? Would NP be transformed into a bulk oil distributor? I mean, as it stands right now, NP doesn't even provide its full transport. A lot of the fleet has been outsourced. And so, again, when you ask key questions, and that is a very scary function of this administration, when you ask key questions meant to clarify policy positions so that people can be, one, more comfortable, and two, be armed with the information to say whether or not they support a decision. Because as it stands, as far as I am aware, Trinidad and Tobago is a democracy, and therefore the people will always have a say, or ought to have a say in policy decisions. So government cannot hand us a policy decision and say, this is best for you, take it, and if you don't like it, leave. Right? We have a stake. And in order for us to have an informed stake, the government must give us the information up front. But they have never been able to do that. They make it up as they go along. They give us the information piece by piece as it suits them. So we're saying, listen, we need the information as to what this means for NP. We also need to have a discussion about this fuel levy. The government introduced the fuel levy. They are telling us, listen, the consumer, this doesn't have anything to do with you, this has to do with the retailers. But let us be realistic. Let us be logical. That is going to be built into the price that you pay at the pump. Because how do you offset cost? At the end of the day, if you are anybody is being charged a fuel levy, it is the view of the opposition that this ought not to just go into the consolidated fund, and then, like a lot of other things that go into the consolidated fund, we don't have a real say in where the money is being spent or invested. We're saying if a fuel levy is being charged, let it be directed to infrastructural works. Because as we stand here in Trinidad and Tobago today, the state of our roadways they've never been worse. As a matter of fact, it is ludicrous to even be talking about our fuel market when we being asked to drive on half of our road most of the time. And so you are introducing a fuel levy. Think about how to maximize that for the benefit of people. Do not put it into the consolidated fund and then spend it on rent or paintings or whatever you feel to spend it on. Spend it in a way, or invest it rather in a way, that citizens can see the true benefit. Because as we move away from this issue of subsidies, and as we talk about a free market, there is a responsibility, there is a role for an executive to say, listen, this is our policy position, but this is how it benefits the majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago. And thus far, in all that they have said, the government has been unable to definitively say how the Trinidadians and Tobagonians will benefit from this policy decision. They are just arbitrarily throwing out words like competition, you'll see lower prices. And we know for a fact that we cannot trust them. We know for a fact that we are given information on a piecemeal basis, and then there is a hope that we forget about it over time. So I am saying on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who are, in the past few years, prior to COVID, seen the shutting down of our very once vibrant industrial estate in Point Lisas. You've seen the closure of multiple industries. We have lived through now the closure of Petrotrin. We are now living through an NGC loss that we've never seen, the likes of that we've never seen before. The facts are before us. The government has failed to effectively manage our energy sector. That failure has led to a high price for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Right now, the current state of our economy is largely based on their mismanagement, their poor policy decision making. And what that means is that Trinidadians now and the next generation of Trinidadians and Tobagonians will continue to pay a very high price for policy decisions that this PNM administration has made. And now I will pass on to my colleague, Mr. Dave Tancoo, who will go through in detail what kind of price we'll be paying.
Thank you, MP Haynes. Last Friday, in addition to the issue with regards to the fuel levy that the Honourable Member just spoke about, Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, came to the Parliament and gave a typical breakdown of what he has done as a Minister of Finance from day one. He came to tax, he came to fine citizens, and he came to borrow. Now let me state clearly for the record, ladies and gentlemen, that the opposition is not against law and order. As a matter of fact, the opposition is not against stiffer penalties for criminal activities. We are not against the protection of our citizens. In fact, everything that we have sought to do in the last 6 years in opposition has been for the greater benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. What we are completely against, ladies and gentlemen, is the government pretending to be for the people and flaunting high fines as if it is a gift to citizens of this country. All of the fines proposed by the minister already exists in this country. But how many people have been caught and brought to justice over the last few years for these offenses? How many people have been caught in the last year, in the last 2 years, or in the last 6 years since this minister has been the Minister of Finance? Higher fines, ladies and gentlemen, has no value if the persons that they are pretending to protect, it has no value to the citizens of this country if no one is brought to justice. If the citizens that they are protecting and they claim to be protecting are unable to receive the benefit of protection, actual protection, are unable to see the fines be put into effect, these fines will have no effect. Higher fines also have no value economically if no one is made to pay it. It is quite frankly designed as a mamagai. The mamagai citizens into thinking that the government cares for you, when this minister and this government could have taken several easy, basic steps to treat with the very problems that they are coming to treat with now by fines. Let me give you one example. We have many reports in Trinidad and Tobago of farmers having invested thousands of dollars and hundreds of man-hours in their fields in sun and rain, toiling to earn an honest dollar. And one morning they wake up, they go to their fields with the intention of taking their crop to market, and they find that their crops have been stolen and they have lost their entire investment of time and money. This is a frustrating, heartbreaking experience that is happening throughout the constituency of Oropouche West, which I represent, and farming communities throughout the country. But these farmers have no recourse to insurance. They have no support from the government. They have no way of recovering their losses. They are made to shoulder their loss, dry their tears, and try again. Every farmer in this country knows this fear. And too many farmers know this feeling. But if the Predial Larceny Squad does not have sufficient members, it doesn't have sufficient officers, it doesn't have the equipment, it doesn't have sufficient vehicles, the government could raise the fines by 100%, 1,000%, it will have no effect. And the Minister of Finance knows that. What he needs to tell this country is why he has done nothing about it. In his budget last year, the Minister of Finance put aside $500 million, $500 million, into account at the Ministry of Finance for the purpose of establishing an agricultural stimulus package. 3 months ago, the minister gave to the Minister of Agriculture 57 of those $500 million for the purpose of providing food hampers via NAMDEFCO. And it's already in the public domain that severe allegations, significant allegations of corruption, mismanagement, and political abuse with regards to that hamper distribution and hamper procurement program have been made. These things are already in the public domain. But more importantly, what that means is that the minister is sitting on $443 million to date. Some of that money could have been used to hire more officers, to buy equipment, to buy vehicles for these officers. Some of that money could have been used to ensure that officers are available 24/7 to the farming community of Trinidad and Tobago, so that when issues of predial larceny exist, when it happens, they can hold these individuals to account, these criminals to account, and bring them to justice quickly and expeditiously ensure that farmers are compensated. Obviously, security will mean that farmers will be more inclined to invest in the agricultural sector, including related associated processing and spin-off industries. This will allow, ladies and gentlemen, a greater contribution by the agricultural sector to revenue creation, to taxation via the expenditure and income, and to employment creation. Instead, when the minister had the opportunity and the funds to make a difference to the agricultural sector of Trinidad and Tobago, he chose not to do so, depriving this country of two things: a vibrant agricultural sector and a potential source of revenue for the government. The minister also sought to raise fines for illegal quarrying. Now, illegal quarrying in this country is a multi-billion-dollar business annually. But importantly too, billions of dollars are lost in potential revenue to this very same government because of the limp-wristed approach that the government has taken to the sector. Worse, there are already strong laws and penalties in place against illegal quarrying and a myriad of related activities. Properly regulated, this is a second sector in existence right now which could have contributed billions to the public purse, billions to central government in revenue. But what have they done? Let's take a look at the tax base. These are just a couple of the examples, and there are several other examples existing in the finance bill itself, where the government should have made more effort to treat with the development of the industries that exist already, and therefore be in a better position to generate revenue. But they have failed to do so. This is why the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is in free fall and has contracted by over $25 billion since Colin Imbert became the Minister of Finance. You know, I'm extremely shocked to hear the Minister of Finance recently advertise on national television that he himself was surprised that the revenue streams had dried up so much. Every one of us in Trinidad and Tobago are very well aware that the economy has collapsed. Everywhere you turn, you would see businesses have closed down. You would see it, ladies and gentlemen. Recently, as recent as yesterday, the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Small and Medium-Sized Businesses confirmed what we already know, that the micro, small, and medium-sized business sector is either on the verge of collapse or has collapsed. But it's not just micro, small, and medium-sized businesses. We've had large businesses such as ArcelorMittal, franchises like Polio Tropical, and several other significant business ventures which has closed doors because of the policies of this government. You know, last year, the World Bank advised us that we are ranked 105th on the ease of doing business. What does that mean? It means that there are 104 other countries in which it is easier to do business than in Trinidad and Tobago. And that includes several Caribbean countries. But it's worse. We are almost at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to enforcing contracts, registering property, and paying taxes. That, ladies and gentlemen, was in 2020, and we already know that 2021 will be significantly worse. After 6 years in government, this Minister of Finance and this P&M government has made Trinidad and Tobago a hostile place for investors and for businesses. What that means is that with no significant direct foreign investment coming in, with thousands of businesses have already gone out of operation, with many more in crisis now and likely to go into bankruptcy and out of business because of the government's shutdown of the economy, the tax base, the potential tax base for the central government from the business community has contracted significantly. That's one source of government revenue. But let's look at another source. What about government revenue from income tax? Recently, thanks to the intervention of a community-spirited individual, the Minister of Finance was forced to lay the NIB report for 2019 and 2020 in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And what this report revealed was shocking. According to the report, 112,000 persons who were in jobs in 2015 had lost their job by June 2020. 112,000 persons who were employed in 2015, thanks to Coleman Booth, were now unemployed. Let me put that in some perspective. In 2015, when the minister came into office, 21,900 persons were listed as looking for a job and unable to find one. That is, that they were unemployed. What this means is because of the policies of the government and because of the policies of this Minister of Finance, unemployment has increased by 400% between 2015 and 2020 under this government at June 2020. Unemployment has increased by 400% under the Minister of Finance. And this is not about COVID, ladies and gentlemen. This is about mismanagement. This is about incompetence. Because that figure does not include the numbers of persons who have lost their job between June 2020 and today. The bulk of jobs that have been lost because of COVID, because of the government's closure of the economy during COVID. This figure of 400% increase in unemployment does not include persons who do not subscribe to the NIS. So they are in the informal sector. Doubles vendors, grocery workers, etc., etc. Significant number of persons, especially at the lower income bracket, who lost their jobs are not included in this 112,000 persons who have lost their job. This drastic increase in unemployment by 400%, thanks to the Minister of Finance. Obviously then, the government has lost a significant bite of their tax base from the working population. So having butchered the traditional revenue sources, this government has resorted now to running fiscal deficits, totaling over $48 billion between 2015 and 2020. And by all projections, the fiscal deficit for the year 2021 will be again in double figures. How has this government funded this deficit? How has it been able to fund this runaway expenditure, this profligate spending that they have been involved in? Well, last Friday, the Minister of Finance came and gave us a little tidbit. The Minister of Finance came and asked for the Parliament to give him permission to borrow an additional $10 billion under one act. It's called the Development Loans Act. How this operates is that there are several acts of Parliament under which the Minister of Finance and the government can borrow funds. One of those is the Development Loans Act. The minister came to seek the permission of the Parliament to use their parliamentary majority to get the approval to raise the ceiling to borrow up to $65 billion. Now, this is the third time in the last 5.5 years that the minister has used the government's majority to increase their borrowing limits. In August 2015, when the minister came in, the borrowing limit was $30 billion. Immediately thereafter, the minister raised the ceiling to allow him to borrow up to $45 billion. He borrowed and spent that. In September 2019, the minister again came to increase the ceiling to borrow up to $55 billion. He borrowed and spent that. And today, again, the minister is now asking for permission to borrow up to $65 billion. It took 51 years and 14 governments. Bear those figures in mind. It took 51 years and 14 governments to borrow up to $30 billion under this act. And in 5.5 years, this minister has borrowed double that. This minister has doubled the amount of borrowing under this act. It seems that no matter how much money this gentleman has, no matter how much he borrows, it is never enough. The most recent available statistic to us tells us that the net public sector debt, as at the end of December 2020, was $122 billion, or more than twice the annual budget, the highest it has ever been in this country. And we know that the government has signed another $204 million loan with the government of China, and it has accessed other loans through other multilateral and multi-lending agencies, which will carry our debt profile to an even worse problem. But borrowing is not the problem, ladies and gentlemen. The issue is not borrowing. The issue is what you do with the money you borrow and what provisions you have made to repay that debt. Nobody in their right mind borrows money, indebts themselves, put their assets at risk, and has no clue about how to pay it back. Nobody except this Minister of Finance and this government. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this is because they are not indebting themselves. This government is not, when it borrows money, is not indebting the Minister of Finance. They are indebting us. They are indebting future generations of this country while destroying the very same industries and sectors which they need to generate a revenue to pay those debts. It is common sense that every time you borrow, somebody has to repay. And that somebody, ladies and gentlemen, thanks to this Minister of Finance, is every taxpaying citizen in this country. This government has simply passed the bill on to future generations. They passed the bill on for their spending to future generations, to your children, to my children, to their children, and to their children's children for generations to come. They live today by mortgaging the careers and futures of our nation's children. If the current debt is shared equally, and we know that it is not, if the current debt is shared equally, it means that every man, woman, and child in Trinidad and Tobago, including the child that just wrote her SEA exam, including children just born, are going to owe. It means that every single man, woman, and child in this country will start today owing the country, owing debtors over $100,000 because of this government's borrowing. The per capita debt, that's a debt that each citizen owes because of government borrowing, is $100,000 per person. Now, this minister said that he has to borrow to pay salaries and outstanding bills. Now, he has to borrow to pay recurrent expenditure. But this billions of dollars that we have borrowed, this $122 billion in debt, didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen now. It happened over a series of years. So what then has this minister been borrowing for the last 5.5 years to do? What has this minister spent? What has this minister spent over $300 billion from the time he became minister to now, and not been able to create a single new vibrant stream of revenue that can be used to pay back all of this money or any of this money that he's been borrowing? A couple of years ago, the minister boasted that he had found the solutions and that he had found 6 game changers which would put the country back on track. It is now history that every one of those game changers has flopped. As a matter of fact, every time the minister comes with a positive spin on fact, he proves himself to be less than truthful to the population. But what is clear is that this government and this Minister of Finance had no intention. They never intended to restructure the economy. They were never interested and intended to create new industries or to create new revenue streams and sources of income for the central government. That is why very early in their term, they disbanded the Economic Development Advisory Board, which they themselves had set up, they fired everyone on that board and shut it down completely. That was at the start of their term. Fast forward to today. The government spent thousands of man-hours and millions of dollars to promote something they called the National Roadmap Committee. Just like with the Economic Advisory Board, they spent millions to put it in place and then turned around and ignored it into oblivion. What has been then the result of this mismanagement? With no new sources of revenue to repay loans, to meet recurrent expenditures, and having admitted already to maxing out the consolidated fund, the minister obviously intends to go back to what they are accustomed doing. They are going to raid the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. They are going to cut spending in critical social safety net areas like education, health, social welfare generally, grants for children who are in need. They are going to increase taxation, including the implementation of the property tax. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to see a fire sale of the patrimony of this country. In case, ladies and gentlemen, you were closing your fridge and did not hear what the ministers already implied and indicated, let me repeat. Because we have already seen the scandals associated with the sale or the purported sale, the fictitious sale of Petrotrin, because they want to give it to who they want to give it to. We are already aware of the bacchanal that started when they tried to divest their assets in Clico. And we already know that the government is looking with cocky eye at the port, at WASA, and at the assets of the National Insurance Board and TSTT. They are going to sell off the state's patrimony, your patrimony, ladies and gentlemen. And we must pay close attention to that. Because while our citizens are being burdened by debt, as I just described, others are feeding at the trough, benefiting from the violations of the basic procurement procedures and the government's tacit refusal, intent refusal to fully implement a proper procurement legislation. We have seen, ladies and gentlemen, a series of insider deals and questionable activity existing under this government. I call on citizens to pay close attention to what this government is doing with your money, because you are going to be asked to pay for it. Just yesterday, I found in my mailbox a memo that purports to come from TSTT. This memo bears a TSTT letterhead. This memo is on a TSTT letterhead with a partial reference number 15009.2021 and dated last month, the 17th of June, 2021. Now, I have tried to determine the veracity of this memo, but because the award of contracts by state entities like TSTT, Heritage, NGC, and NLCB, and amongst others, because these kinds of contracts are many and are often unseen by average citizens like myself and yourselves, I have to ask the media if they can have greater luck in verifying the veracity of this document. The memo is attached to a director and advises Expression of Interest Digital Services EM212004262514. And this is what this letter says. This is what this memo says. Telecommunications Services of Trinidad and Tobago, TSTT, wishes to advise that it has selected a fintech partner based on the proposals received in relation to the above captioned expression of interest. As a result, the fintech component of the EOI is now closed. Just to repeat, as a result, the fintech component of the expression of interest is now closed. Notwithstanding the above, Please note that TSTT continues to evaluate the other components of the EOI and will communicate on the awards of the same soon after this is determined. TSTT thanks you for your interest in doing business with us. Yours faithfully, Procurement Services. FinTech Partner. Expression of interest. Now, I have worked in a procurement capacity in a very large multi-billion-dollar enterprise before. And I know that basic procurement practice, the very basic procurement practice, is the creation of a specification, the request of expressions of interest, either to known providers or in public, the review of these expressions of interest and the evaluation of them to evaluate the capability and capacity of the providers, the issuance then of a formal tender process, the evaluation of these tenders, negotiations, and then the award of the tender. I have never heard of an award of a contract based solely on the basis of an expression of interest, especially if there are multiple potential supporters. So I have to ask the directors of TSTT, the CEO of TSTT, managers of TSTT, the Minister of Public Utilities, and the Minister of Finance, under whom all of this falls. Is this award real? Because if it is, then clearly somebody or somebodies at TSTT and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Public Utilities, somebody or somebodies have to be held accountable, because this is not TSTT's funds. These are monies that belong to tax-paying citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. These are monies that we have to find to source to pay for services that we can use instead of paying for corruption, that we can use to improve the standard and quality of lives of our citizens. So I repeat, I ask, is this award real? It cannot be acceptable that taxpayers must be asked to foot a massive debt and still be asked to fund this kind of contract award. I hold the rest of questions on this issue for now. I urge citizens again to use this opportunity to speak out. Pay attention to what the government is doing with your money, because they are going to come to ask you for more. There's a massive amount of corruption, mismanagement, and political bacchanal going on under this government. And we cannot afford it as a country. If we let this slide, ladies and gentlemen, if we allow this government to continue to borrow, then we will be paying for this P&M policy, not just now, but for the rest of our natural lives and for the lives of citizens of this country. For your children and your children's children and their children's children's sake, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. Let us join together to hold this country to account, to hold this government to account. Let us join together as a country to ensure that this government tells us the truth about what they are doing with the billions that they have borrowed, the billions they have spent, and how they propose to spend, how they propose to improve, how they propose to repay the debts, ladies and gentlemen, that they have incurred over the last 5.5 years. I thank you. If there are any questions from the media, my colleague and I are available to answer them at this point. Well, apparently we have done an exceptional job again of explaining the positions that we have adopted. Members of the media can continue to send questions if they are so inclined to our website, and we will respond to them in due course and as quickly as we can. On behalf of my colleague Anita Haynes and myself, on behalf of the Office of the Leader of the Opposition and the Opposition UNC in general, I thank you for paying attention. I thank you for being with us today. May God bless us. May God bless us all. Please be safe. Stay well. Thank you.